Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and this is going to be a fun one today. I'm looking at post-war Japan manufactured reels that were exported to the U.S. And it just happens that I got a box of these that have just been accumulating over a little bit of time. And I thought maybe it was a chance to learn some of this. You know, some of the fun of doing reel repair and just kind of diving in and trying to put reels back together, or at least see how they work, is to try and figure out a little bit of the history behind them and watch how they've evolved over time. So the four here are probably models from the 50s, early 60s. They were made by various Japanese plants that were established post-war. Most of them just say Japan, don't even say made in Japan on them. Some of those survive, some of these have not. So just quickly, some of these look like they've come from the same place and maybe just have a different name on them. Some of these have come from different manufacturers. Here's a Hedden. Here's an Olympic, which is pretty much still around. Here's a Fluger, which is certainly still around. This one was made in Japan as part of the Fluger. This one is a High, and this one says Japan, but it was part of the Gladding company in the U.S., so that was an export. So, you know, what they're doing today and all of the talk we hear about all of the manufacture being shipped to China is it's an old tune, right? It's not a new tune at all. Here's Hedden. Hedden was by Daisy and Hedden, U.S. company, but made in Japan. This is Olympic. We saw a lot of Olympics when I was growing up, for sure. And this is the one I'm going to choose to work on today, just to take it apart, because I've never taken one apart. And as many of you know, I buy fishing reels and sometimes just take them apart. And if they can't be put back together, if they're broken, if they're unrepairable, I just call it the price of tuition. And this one is pretty cheap. This one is a Compac Interceptor. Generally, you can find them probably for about $10. This one turns. It's a little rough in turning. And I also noticed as I was testing it before buying that the bail works, but it doesn't spring quickly, so it tells me it probably needs a lot of oil there. So I'm going to take it apart, see what it looks like, clean it up, do some lubrication on. I hope we don't find any broken parts, and get an education on the reel today. So I'm going to start by taking some of the external parts off. I'm going to take the spool off. The spool's got a little press down button and a looks like a traditional drag set kind of thing. I'll put that in one of my parts buckets. You'll notice I'm wearing that glove. I expect to find exactly what I see here, a lot of dirt and grime. So we'll be doing some cleanup over the course of the work here. And for cleanup, many of you know I use cotton swabs. I use paper towels. I use WD-40. And I'll try and get most of the grease and grime out of there. And as you can tell, this has got very thick grease and grime on it. So we may be spending a little bit of time doing that. And we'll try and get this carrier off, the rotor. And if we can get underneath there, we'll see if we can oil this up. For starting points, I know that bail is sticking very much. So while I work internally, I'm just going to hit that with a generous squirt here of the WD-40. See if we just can't work it in that way. And we'll start by then taking off the side plate. Let's find out what's going on underneath here in the gearing section. What I like to do, there's a click side and a non-click side on the throw switch here. I like to disengage that click, because that way when you pull the main gear out, you don't have to worry about resetting that. Okay, so remove the handle. That's a clockwise turn. There's 3 set screws here. There happen to be just a small Phillips head, and I'm using a manual screwdriver for that. Some folks like to use the mechanical screwdrivers, the battery-powered ones. I kind of recommend against that. Those of you that watch my videos know that I don't like the torque when reassembling on that. I think that the torque is very strong, and it can either warp a side panel or it can crack a plastic one. So I just like to be cautious there. and do that. Okay, the 3 pieces are out there. Should be able to remove it. I did. Oh boy, there you go. So this is why it's slow. It's got a lot of congealed real grease in there. It's very dirty as well. I hope it's real grease and maybe not axle grease, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. And then we can see on this side as well, there's just a pile of grease. Mechanically, it's a simple operation in terms of fishing reels. It would have to be. Most of these were made for the lower end cost. Look at this. It just comes right off like that. Huh? It almost looks like caramel. Then for those that say caramel and not caramel, I guess we could have an argument one day about how to pronounce it. But regardless, we're going to clean it up, and we're going to put some nice fresh blue grease in there over time. Okay, and this has got a stud on the back, so as you're cranking and it's going around this pinion gear here, it's moving the shaft up and down, which is the crosswind block. A little bit different, but a little bit the same. And we got a ton of garbage grease in there, which is, I'm sure it's why this reel is jamming. I'm sure it gets up top there, and it's just pressing in on everything. So I wear that to keep me clean, and I try to my best to make sure that as this works, that I don't get that much of it on my hands. Now we've got an interesting one here. We got a collar tied down for the shaft, but it also looks like there's 4 screws that are going to hold the crosswind block onto that shaft as well. So this is exploratory. You can notice that I'm using a parts bucket. It's just simply the bottom of a milk jug, and I'm using that so that I don't lose these small pieces and parts. As you might imagine, and I hope this is on camera, we'll move that over here. As you might imagine, if you lose a part, you're kind of done. There's no parts available for these. So these reels were the modern day equivalent of the Chinese reel that you could get for $20. That would be a various store brand, or it'd be a major brand just at the low end of the product line that they're just looking for filler on. And they would outsource that overseas. They would protect their core brands or their core ones, maybe like Penn does with the U.S., with the international, and then they would ship some of the lower ends of the product line out to be built overseas to take advantage of the labor costs there. Okay, so we took that down. I'm looking here, and I do notice that on this shaft there are the 2 holes for the screws for the crosswind block. So that's good to know. This crosswind block needs a lot of love and attention, and I also noticed that that's the locking mechanism for the spool shaft. Now, one of the recommendations I have is, if you don't know what you're doing, if it's the first time you've seen a reel, and this is the first time I've seen a reel, that you take pictures along the way as you disassemble this thing. A lot of times I'll tell you go get the schematic, but I couldn't find much information at all on the Compac reel other than it was certainly made in Japan, which it says on the bottom, and that it was kind of a contract manufacturer that made a lot of stuff for department stores and the like. So it didn't even say what manufacturer it was running it for. Some did, right? Some say that, for example, Ryobi was distributed in the U.S. by Zebco. Daiwa stayed by itself, right? There was others that were sold by other organizations, and I did see somewhere that it suggested that St. Croix was actually distributing the Compac line, but I haven't been able to verify that. So St. Croix being the manufacturers of the high-quality rods today. Okay, so we're just continuing to clean this muck up, and when I get it to a manageable point here, I think I'm just going to hit it with a little bit of WD-40 just to get the last remnants of it off, because clearly that's what was causing this to bog down. Okay, so I'm just going to put a nice coating in there. I'm going to continue with the cotton swabs, and this is always fun, right? Because you can see the engineering that goes in behind this, and then you can open up other reels and you can start saying, okay, this must have been made in that plant, because maybe the case changed, but if I look inside, the componentry is very similar. So for example, in today's world, you can pick up a Zebco, if I get this right, Probably not. Shakespeare. You can pick up a Shakespeare reel, and you can pick up a Pfluger reel, like the Pfluger President, and the parts in many cases are interchangeable. Okay, so we're coming up top now to the rotor. I'm trying to get the junk off the rotor here, and if I can do that, we're going to see if we can't pull the rotor off. I should be able to. And if I can pull that rotor off there, then we should be able to lubricate that as well. Let's take a guess here on the size. That's not nothing easy to grab there. This is not cooperating very well. Well, I probably got into a pair of pliers. As much as I hate pliers and wrenching things with pliers, it may be the only way to find out if we can make this thing move. So I'm going to use channel lock pliers. See if we can't turn that off. This thing has been sitting a long time. Okay, we got it. So this one is two things you got to wonder about these reels or know about these reels. Sometimes off means turning it right as opposed to left, and that's one of the things that was going on here. And sometimes age just tends to make off more difficult. So I'm going to have to tap this pinion out of here. I don't want to hit it right on the thread. I don't want to hit it at all, but sometimes it needs that that little motivation there. So I'm going to rethread this. Remember, to put it back on, you're actually like trying to take it off. Leave some space, and I'm going to grab it and hit it that way. Now I've loosened it up. So if you need to persuade it, my dad used to say, then by all means what you want to do there is keep the nut on so that you don't damage the threading with that little bop you give it. Okay, this is going to get cleaned up nicely. There's no ball bearings in this reel. That would make sense. It was a low-end reel there. Many of you just saw that the pinion gear came through. That's fine. We've got a brass bushing on it, and this is cleaning up nicely. This is also another reason why you take pictures along the way, because if you find yourself in a situation where something falls out and goes oops, then you at least have an understanding of what oops was. So there we go. All right. So there's just a little bit more junk in the channels there, so I'm cleaning that up. I'm going to start reassembling this then, right? So all parts are cleaned. I still haven't got the problem with the bail, but I think we're going to get it because I noticed that there's some congealed grease on the little flipper below. So I'm just going to put a little blue grease onto the bottom end of the shaft. I'll bring that back up top and seat that. And then this was the little washer that went on the top. As such, very good. We're just going to set that aside for a moment, put the parts bucket off. And here's the little trip lever here, and we can tell it's all shellacked. And I'm thinking that that shellacking there is what's causing this to not trip freely when it's hitting the marker. So yep, there we go. So I'm just going to work that in now. We can see there's a pinion there that needs to move, and we're just going to keep lubricating it. And this works an awful lot at a time. A lot of times people will put out reels in yard sales and the like, and it'll be because the bail is not functioning, and a lot of times it's nothing more than it needs a lot of oil. As you can tell, that is not a complicated engineering feat there. Okay, so we got the rotor set. One more wipe down on the inside while we're at it. I'm thinking this one's going to probably work about as good as can be expected. All of the gears are clean. There's no damage that I can see. The parts are being oiled now. We're just going to go ahead, put this back together. We're going to take that bail, excuse me, reseat it on the piece. Take the nut. Remember, the nut tightens by going counterclockwise, which is for the most part counterintuitive, right? But in this case, it's meant to go opposite the direction of the spin, and when it goes opposite the direction of the spin, it can't loosen. You'll notice that there is no set screw, as there are on many of the rotors. Oh, look at me, I'm going backwards anyway. Talking faster than I can do. Use that pliers one more time. I'm out of reach. I could go for a socket. For the brevity of doing this online and trying to get this completed in the time that we do, I'm going to pass on that socket. Okay, so we remember now we have this crosswind block. We're going to go ahead and put the shaft through, crosswind block on. I'll show you how this works. Let's go this way. And then we want to find the two holes. We want to align those two holes. Now I have a centering pin if I can find it. I don't have one. I have something that will serve as a centering pin. I'm just going to put that in the hole there so that we can pull those two pieces together. And then we want to grab those screws that came out of this. We want to put those screws in. And those of you that watch my videos know, sometimes I have a little trouble with those small parts, and this is that part of the video where we have some trouble with those small parts. So if you just bear with me a moment, I'm sure we will get this underway. So I like what I'm seeing here. It's a technology of the time. It's not something that was leading edge. There's certainly no ball bearings in here. It's relatively uncomplicated in manufacture, and I'm sure whoever had this must have done well with it, because it's still around, and it's probably 40, 50 years since it's been around. So as far as I'm concerned, good deal. I think I have the wrong script. Let's try those. There's two separate ones, and again, this is just probably do as I say, not as I do. It's probably an example that shows that you should take pictures, because if you mislabel your parts or misuse them, you can come back and get it, review the picture and see which parts came where. Yep, that was it. I was trying to put the lower collar screw in the higher piece, so that's what happens. Alright, I assume that the next one will go easier. Seems to be the case. Yeah, so after Japan, where did the reels go? So interestingly enough, they went to Korea. They went to Hong Kong, right, as the market started to get more expensive. And ultimately, they made their way over to China. And I guess the question is, where do they go next, right? Because it always seems to chase labor. I'm going to take this main gear out. Make sure it's clean. We need a little bit of cleaning on the back. I'm going to use that paper towel just to get that residual gunk off of there. So this is nice, nice main gear. It's in good condition. I'm checking, making sure the teeth are okay. There's accumulated junk again from years of not being serviced, but other than the accumulated junk, it seems fine. And here's what I was talking about before about that anti-reverse. I like to back it off. Just throw the switch. If I put that switch in the on position, sometimes that becomes a problem trying to mate it back in there. So if you keep it off, you're in good condition. Remember that stud. We're going to have to get that stud into this block here in order to work properly. And we just want to put some grease on that. We're going to put some grease on the teeth here. We did put some grease up top, and I don't notice any bent teeth or any imperfections in scarring or things that would say that this should operate erratically. So we'll take a chance with that. And now the only piece left then is to put this back collar on the bottom. It's going to hold this in place. And that happens two ways. There's a little ferrule here, which I'm struggling with, of course. There we go. So the ferrule goes onto the bottom, and then on that ferrule, here's your cap. And then on the cap is the two smaller screws, the ones I was actually trying to put into the post. Let me grab those. And again, using a centering pin if you need to is a good way to align the holes. This little screw here is similar to the handle screws nuts on the pen handles. Doesn't mean anything other than it's similar, very small. So if you have problems with those, you're going to have problems with these. And I do. So bear with me. So what am I going to do with this reel, I guess is the question. I really don't know what I'm going to do with this reel. I may just go sit on a shelf. These reels aren't valuable. They weren't valuable when they were sold. They probably sold at the time in the 60s probably for a couple of dollars. And I imagine if you did an online search of eBay or one of the online marketplaces, maybe you get $10 for them today. They're not collectible. They were mass produced. Again, not very forward technology, nothing that would cause anybody to want to collect them that I'm aware of. Unless you're trying to find one of every reel you ever fished as a kid, maybe. But other than that, I don't think there's much there from a collectability standpoint. So I'll probably just go ahead and put it on the shelf and call it the price of tuition. If I find somebody who said, gee, I used to fish one of them as a kid, maybe I'll figure out a way to give it to them. Alright, so I had to line that little stud up there. We're going to just take a run to make sure, I wanted to make sure that the reel was turning and that the shaft was going up and down, which is the function of that crosswind block. I'm going to put this screw in here. And I know this video is getting long. It was my intention to go pull the drags from the top of the spool as well. I'm going to do that off camera because I don't want to take much longer and I may run out of memory on this card, so I do apologize. But I did want to show you what a typical Japanese post-war reel looks like. Don't worry, those other reels, the Olympic, the High, the Fluger, and the Heddon, I'll all get to those. Why not, right? There might be somebody out there who actually has one, wants to go use one. When I do this reel as well, to do the drags, I'm also going to pull that line. That line looks like it's probably from the 40s. I don't, not 40s, but 60s, whatever amount of filament. But it doesn't look like it's been changed in quite some time, just like all that dark grease wasn't changed at that time. Okay, and then finally we're just going to put the handle back on for now. Like I said, I'll get back and we'll go work on the drags, but let's go see how this works. Oh yeah, look at this. A nice little reel. And let's go see if we can make that... Alright, so the bail freed up as well. Very good. Alright, so we got a little fun reel now. One that just took part of 25-30 minutes with a lot of explaining to do in terms of a little bit of the history behind the Compac Interceptor. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did, please like this video. If you want to see more, please subscribe to my channel. If you want to see those others that I showed you earlier in the video, stay tuned, because if you subscribe, they'll automatically post a notification when completed. Thanks again. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.